Hi friends, today we're on lesson 4 in your science workbook. Our essential question today is, how does wind move and drop sediments? So this is going to be one lesson, but it's going to have multiple parts. So we'll be talking about erosion and deposition for a few days. Now this is going to be the first day you hear of it. This is the page you should be on. I'm going to switch over here to my slides to teach you about some new vocabulary words. Let's look at this slide. What do you notice about the rocks in this picture? Let's see, what do I notice? I notice that these rocks are different sizes, different shapes, and I see that they're different colors. Is that what you noticed too? Maybe. How do you think the smaller rocks were formed? Does a rock just pop out of the ground? Out of nowhere? I don't know. You can't grow or plant a rock. If you have a big rock, where do these small rocks come from? That might not be a question you ever thought about, but we're going to talk about it today. The word sediments is a very important vocabulary word that I will be using now throughout our science lessons, especially when we're talking about erosion and deposition. Now, those words I'll get into a little later in the lesson. But first, we're going over sediment. Have you ever heard of the word sediment? You might not have. But a sediment or sediments are small pieces of bigger rocks. So maybe have you ever seen a big rock and then maybe that rock has crumbled a little bit? And if that rock has crumbled or broken, it breaks off into little pieces of rock. Since I'm at school, I have some I can show you. Here I have a bigger rock. And you might think, where did this small rock come from? How are rocks just different sizes? Well, rocks become smaller after they break off of another rock. Okay, so sediment is just a small piece of a larger rock, just like in this picture here. Here you have the larger rock, and here you have some sediment all over here. Okay, so it's just some small pieces of a larger rock. And sediment can be in all different types of sizes. Sediments can be a big boulder. You ever seen a boulder? A boulder might be the size of my desk. That could be a boulder. And you might think, well, a boulder could be sediment, but it's not small. A boulder isn't small. Well, that boulder could have came from maybe a mountain or an even bigger type of rock. Okay? So sediment can be all different sizes. Then we have a cobble. A cobble is maybe like a rock that you could pick up with your hands. Still pretty big and still a little heavy. And then you have a pebble. These rocks here look like they might be some pebbles. They're small. A pebble is something you could skip across the water that might jump. And then you're getting smaller. So do you see how we're going smaller and smaller? After a pebble, you have granules. And granules are really small pieces of rock, smaller than a pebble. And then you have sand. Oof, and look at this bag I have of sand. Did you know sand comes from rocks? Sand is just really, really tiny pieces of rock. Let's take it here to show you a little better. See the sand? It's really just tiny pieces of rock. And you might think, oh, that's the smallest it could get for sure. Sediment can't get smaller than that. But that's not true. After sand, there is silt, and that is even smaller and tinier. And clay after that. You've seen clay, right? You've played with clay. Well, there's clay comes from bigger rocks. And it's so tiny. And it is the smallest sediment out of them all. So boulder, and then cobble, then pebble, and then granule, then sand, silt, and clay. Now, how are rock pieces moved from place to place? You might have gone outside before and seen maybe some rocks maybe by your house, or see some rocks by your driveway, or even when you're driving down the road. How do these rocks get different places? Right? Rocks can't just get up and move, and we don't grow rocks. Remember, you can't just say, I'm going to grow some rocks here like you would do with a plant. It doesn't work like that. So how do these rocks go from place to place? Well, there is a word for this process, and this word is erosion. I want you to say it with me, erosion. Erosion means sediment moves. So remember, sediment can be a boulder, a rock, sand, pebbles. So it moves sediment from one place to another. So erosion moves sediment to a new place or a new location. And there's a couple different ways that this can happen. And we will get into that right now. So the first agent of erosion is wind. Wind is the first way that sediment can move from place to place. Think about a really windy day, or a big storm, or like a tornado. Tornadoes have a lot of wind, or even just a windy day. Wind can pick up pebbles like this. It could pick up sand for sure. Raise your hand if you've ever been to the beach on a windy day. I have. What is happening? Does sand maybe get in your mouth and get other places and maybe get in your food? That's because wind can move sediment. And that's what we'll be learning about throughout the first part of this lesson, of lesson 4. This is the first agent of erosion we're learning about is wind. After wind, we'll be talking about water. Water can move sediment from place to place. Think of a flood, or think of a really bad rainstorm. Think about what happens when that rain comes down and hits the ground. Things start moving. So maybe water can push the rocks and push the clay or push the sand into a new place. And maybe it will then flow somewhere else because water can flow. Then you have glacial. So think of a glacier. Glacier is another way that sediment can get from one place to another because glaciers move. Did you know that? Glaciers can move throughout water and they break apart a little bit. So that is also how sediment can move. And finally, gravity. We know what gravity is. It's what pulls things down to the earth. So maybe have you ever heard of like a mudslide, or what else or I'm trying to think of what they're called. When maybe I guess like an earthquake could kind of maybe do this. So you could think of an earthquake, or like maybe a mudslide. If you have rock at the top of a hill or top of a mountain, it might fall down from some movement of the earth and gravity. So the way that sediment can be moved, and remember, sediment being moved is called erosion. So the 4 agents of erosion are wind, water, glacier, and gravity. Let me just pause and see how much time I have left with you. All right, I'll finish this out with you, and then we'll do some experiments, or you'll watch videos of experiments tomorrow. Now, we learned what it's called when the objects move, when the sediment moves. When sediment is moving, it's called erosion. But what's it called when these pieces stop moving, when they landed in a new place? What is that called? That is called deposition. Deposition means dropping sediments in a new location. So erosion is when the sediment is moving and how it's moving, and deposition is where it lands. So say there was a really, really, really bad rainstorm, there was a thunderstorm, and there were rocks maybe up on a hill, and because of all the rain, the rocks slid to the bottom of the hill. So as the rocks are moving, that's erosion. And then where the rock ends up, maybe at the bottom of the hill, that's deposition. It's deposited at the bottom of the hill. You can think of it as like when you go to the bank and maybe your parents deposit money. That's where the money stays. That's the new place for the money. That's a new spot for it. So deposition is where the sediment stays. It's the new spot for the sediment. Let's look at this picture of the rock. Look at this rock. It goes like this, and then wait a second. There's a huge hole in this rock. How do you think this hole formed? It says, hint, it was not a machine. You look, I'm going to try to zoom in. There's a huge hole in this rock. How do you think that happens? If it wasn't a machine, it happened naturally. It happened because of erosion. So it could have been a lot of wind over the years, or maybe a lot of rain, and it just it was really hard on that rock, and it pushed at it and pushed at it and pushed at it and pushed at it, and over years and years and years and years and years, it started to crumble away little by little. So wind erosion is wind carrying small sediments, wearing away material. So that's what we're going to be learning about. Let me think, it'll be tomorrow. So you will see some videos of wind erosion. And wind erosion is the wind being so strong that it's picking up and carrying the small sediments away. And it eventually wears down. So this rock was standing here tall and strong, but with all of the wind, it's getting a lot of pressure, and it's a lot of hard work going against that rock. And eventually it starts to crumble. A little by a little bit more crumbling, and that hole forms from the wind. Because that wind, after a long time, can be so strong. So that wind is carrying away those sediments to a new place. Here are some other pictures of how this can happen. All right, these rocks just aren't like this for fun. They weren't sculpted like that. These rocks have maybe a hole in it, or are vertical and have cool shapes because of wind erosion. Because the wind was blowing so hard into it, that wind can make some pieces of rock, some of that smaller sediment, fall off and crumble apart, and it brings that rock somewhere else. The wind is so strong, it takes the rocks, crumbles it down, and the rocks go somewhere else. All of that sediment goes somewhere else. And then you're left with a new shape of rock. That is pretty cool. So I will show you some experiment videos of what wind erosion can look like tomorrow.